I had a neighbor, an old man named Mr. Harrison. Life had clearly taken its toll on him. His back was permanently bent, his hands shook when he moved them, and his face looked carved out of wrinkles and long-forgotten memories. Yet, unlike many elderly neighbors who constantly complained about noise or kids in the hallway, he was gentle, quiet, always polite. The kind of man everyone greeted warmly in passing. That evening, I was coming home from late classes at school. The air was cold and damp, the kind that sneaks under your jacket and makes you shiver. Most of the apartment windows were already dark. Families had finished dinner and settled in for the night. That's why it surprised me to see Mr. Harrison sitting alone on the bench near the entrance to our apartment building. Usually, by that hour, all the older residents were already inside watching TV or sleeping. But there he was, sitting completely still, hands resting on his knees, staring somewhere into the darkness of the parking lot. For a strange second, I wondered how long he'd been sitting there. "Good evening, Mr. Harrison," I said as I walked closer. He didn't react. Not even a blink. Assuming his hearing was acting up again, I stepped closer and repeated, a little louder, "Good evening." He suddenly jerked slightly, like someone waking from a dream, and slowly turned his head toward me. "Oh, Emily, hello, sweetheart. Sorry. I was just lost in thought." His voice sounded dry, strained, like he hadn't spoken to anyone in hours. "That's okay," I smiled. "What were you thinking about?" I was in a good mood and didn't mind chatting. And honestly, something about his expression made me curious. His eyes looked distant, not sad exactly, but heavy, like he was carrying something he'd never been able to put down. He stayed silent for a few seconds, staring at the cracked sidewalk. "Old memories," he finally said quietly. "From when I was just a little boy, about this tall." He lifted his trembling hand, holding it barely above his knee, fingers shaking slightly in the cold night air. Then he slowly looked at me again. And something in his face changed. The warmth drained away. His eyes darkened with something that made a chill creep up my spine. "Tell me, Emily, do you have a little time?" he asked softly. "I'd like to tell you something." There was something different in his tone now. Urgent. Almost pleading. I hesitated. The courtyard suddenly felt emptier than before. No passing cars. No voices. No footsteps. Even the stray cats that usually hung around the dumpsters were gone. Just the hum of the flickering parking lot light above us, and the old man watching me expectantly. Curiosity got the better of me. I sat down beside him on the cold bench and nodded. "I've got time." He let out a slow breath, almost like relief, then leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Listen carefully, Emily, because I have never told this story to anyone. Not once. In all my life." Mr. Harrison paused, staring into the darkness between the parked cars as if the memories themselves were standing there, waiting for him. "What you're about to hear," he continued quietly, "is the absolute truth. I saw it with my own eyes. And until tonight, I never told a soul." His voice grew heavier, and the night air suddenly felt colder. "It happened a long time ago. Back during the years after the war. I was just a kid, maybe 10 years old. That winter was the worst anyone could remember. Crops had failed across half the country, factories were shutting down, people were losing jobs, and whole neighborhoods were left with nothing." He frowned, studying my face carefully. "You probably don't really know what hunger looks like," he said, not unkindly, but with a bitterness that made me uncomfortable. I didn't answer. He went on. "I saw people collapse right on the sidewalks. Just drop face first into the snow. And the worst part? Others would just walk past them. Nobody stopped. Nobody helped." He swallowed hard. Not because people didn't care, but because nobody had anything left to give. Everyone was barely surviving themselves. The buzzing street lamp above us flickered again. And for a second his face seemed even older. We lived in one of those grey apartment blocks near the rail yards. Cold walls, broken elevators, heat that barely worked. Every morning, people lined up outside soup kitchens, hoping there'd still be food left by the time their turn came. He rubbed his trembling hands together, as if trying to warm them, though the night wasn't that cold. "My father was a police officer. A detective. That was the only reason we had food at home when others didn't. The department made sure officers' families got ration supplies. Beans, canned meat, powdered milk sometimes. His expression softened slightly at the memory. But because of his job, he was almost never home. Sometimes he'd disappear for days, chasing criminals, guarding warehouses, or traveling to nearby towns dealing with riots or theft. People were desperate. When hunger hits, good people do terrible things. He sighed. I barely saw him back then. And I was at that age when kids start asking questions. I wanted to know what he really did at work. Why he came home exhausted, sometimes with bruises, sometimes smelling like smoke or blood. Mr. Harrison glanced at me again, his eyes reflecting the dim yellow light. He always avoided answering. Said it wasn't for kids' ears. But I kept begging him to take me along one day. Just once. He gave a faint, humorless smile. And after weeks of me pestering him, he finally agreed. Mr. Harrison leaned closer, his voice dropping almost to a whisper. That was the biggest mistake of my childhood. Mr. Harrison rubbed his hands together slowly, as if trying to warm them, though the air around us wasn't cold enough to justify it. His eyes were fixed somewhere far away, back in a time he clearly wished he could forget. I don't remember all the details anymore, he continued quietly. Too many years have passed. But from what I understood back then, someone had reported an old man living alone in one of the apartment buildings. Said he was distributing illegal pamphlets, stirring people up. Talking about rebellion, government conspiracies, things like that. He shrugged slightly. To the officers, it looked like a routine job. No danger expected. Just a search warrant, confiscate whatever they found, maybe bring the man in for questioning. He gave a faint, bitter smile. And I kept begging my father to let me come along. I thought it was exciting, real police work. Something important. His voice softened. So that morning, exactly at 6 o'clock, my father woke me up. Told me to get dressed quickly. He paused, then added. At the time, I honestly thought it would be one of the happiest days of my life. That's how badly I wanted to see what he did for a living. A distant car passed somewhere behind us, its headlights briefly sweeping across the courtyard before disappearing again. We got into his squad car while it was still dark outside. Frost covered the windows, and the city felt half asleep. I remember feeling proud sitting there, like I was part of something serious. Mr. Harrison shook his head slowly. My father met up with 2 other officers nearby. They joked a little, drank coffee from paper cups, talked like it was just another ordinary morning. His jaw tightened. Half an hour later, we arrived at the building. He looked down at his hands again. My father told me to stay behind and wait until he called me. Said I wasn't to go anywhere or get in the way. The old man's voice dropped slightly. The apartment was on the first floor. I remember standing near the bottom of the stairwell while my father and the other officers went up and knocked on the door. He swallowed. Nobody opened at first. They knocked again. Louder. Then someone inside started shouting. Angry, desperate yelling. I couldn't make out the words. The street lamp buzzed again overhead. After a long minute, the door suddenly swung open. Mr. Harrison's fingers tightened slightly as if remembering the scene too clearly. An elderly man stood there. Thin, painfully thin. Wearing a dirty bathrobe that barely hung on him. His face looked hollow, like he hadn't eaten properly in months. He took a slow breath. The officers showed their badges and pushed past him into the apartment. A silence hung between us. 5 minutes later, my father came back down the stairs, looked at me, and said. Mr. Harrison's voice softened. All right, kid. You can come up now. Just look around. Don't touch anything. Mr. Harrison's voice dropped so low that I instinctively leaned closer to hear him. His hands trembled slightly as he spoke, whether from age or memory I couldn't tell. I still remember that man's face, he said quietly. Strange, wrong somehow. His eyes looked empty, like nothing happening around him mattered anymore. He swallowed. The officers were moving around the apartment, opening drawers, checking closets, talking among themselves. But the old man, he didn't say a single word from the moment they entered. Mr. Harrison stared into the darkness. Not a protest. Not a complaint. Nothing. He rubbed his thumb slowly against his palm. But the moment he noticed me standing in the hallway, something changed. A cold knot twisted in my stomach as he spoke. Everyone was so busy searching the place that nobody noticed he'd started watching me. Just staring. He shook his head slowly. And I mean really staring. Without blinking. A silence stretched between us, thick and uncomfortable. It scared me. I didn't understand why, but it did. He continued. They'd already moved him into the kitchen and handcuffed him to the old radiator pipe so he couldn't interfere with the search. One of the officers patted my shoulder and joked, "Keep an eye on him, kid. Just don't get too close." Mr. Harrison exhaled slowly. So there I was, standing near the kitchen doorway, trying not to look at him. But you know how it is when someone's staring at you. You feel it. He glanced at me, eyes dark. I could feel his gaze drilling into me. The parking lot behind us seemed unnaturally quiet now. I wanted to leave. Every instinct told me to step away. But my father had ordered me to stay put, and I wasn't about to disobey him. I didn't want anyone seeing I was scared. He paused. So I forced myself to look at him. Mr. Harrison's jaw tightened. His mouth was slightly open, and from it, a thin string of saliva hung down, almost reaching the floor. I felt goosebumps crawl up my arms. And he never stopped staring at me. Not once. The old man continued, his voice barely above a whisper now. Then I heard a door creak somewhere deeper in the apartment. At the time, I didn't know what it was. Later, I realized my father and the others had found a door leading down into the basement. He closed his eyes briefly. There was a moment of silence. Then I heard my father shout, asking where I was. Mr. Harrison's voice grew tight. The second I answered, he yelled for me to get out of the kitchen. Immediately, he looked back at me, his expression grim. But before I moved, I looked at the old man again. The bench creaked as Mr. Harrison shifted slightly. And what I saw, I'll never forget. His voice shook. His face had twisted into something inhuman. All reason gone. Just pure hatred, rage, like he wanted to tear me apart. Mr. Harrison's trembling hand slowly lifted, instinctively recreating the motion. He lunged forward as far as the handcuffs allowed, his arms stretching toward my face, his fingers clawing the air, stopping just inches away. The old man leaned slightly closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. I could smell his breath, rotten, foul, like something dead. A chill crawled along my spine. And when he opened his mouth wider, I saw his teeth. Mr. Harrison swallowed. They'd been filed down. Sharpened. Like an animal's. He fell silent. Mr. Harrison's breathing grew uneven. For several seconds, he seemed unable to continue, his eyes fixed on something only he could see. Then he spoke again. A gunshot snapped me out of it. I flinched at the sudden change in his tone. My father burst into the kitchen, and before I even understood what was happening, he shot the man. The old man's fingers curled tightly against his knees. One of the officers immediately threw a blanket over the body. Someone else rushed out into the hallway, shouting orders. Radios crackled. Boots pounded on the floor. Everything turned chaotic. He shook his head slowly. And I still didn't understand what was going on. Not really. The only thing I knew was that my father had just saved my life. His voice softened. In the confusion, nobody paid attention to me anymore. I was just there. Forgotten. Mr. Harrison swallowed. And then I noticed the blood. He stared at the pavement beneath us. It started seeping out from under the blanket. Dark, spreading slowly across the kitchen floor. I couldn't look at it anymore. His voice trembled. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I needed air. Needed to get away. He exhaled slowly. So I left the kitchen and walked into the hallway. For a moment, even the wind seemed to die down around us. I was just wandering, trying to calm down, when I noticed something. His eyes widened slightly. A door at the end of the corridor stood open. The basement door. He fell silent for several seconds, his expression frozen in the memory. In the dim streetlight, his face looked pale, almost grey. I leaned forward and looked down into the darkness. His voice became barely audible. It took a few seconds for my eyes to adjust. He swallowed hard. And then, I saw them. My stomach twisted. Limbs. Pieces of bodies. Arms, legs, bones, things piled together like garbage. His hands trembled violently now, and from the size of them, I understood they belonged to children. A heavy silence settled over the courtyard. They were stacked in a heap down there, he whispered. And as horrible as that was, it still wasn't the worst part. He closed his eyes briefly. In the far corner of the basement, there was a little girl. His voice cracked. She was still alive. The words hung in the air, but her arms and legs were gone. Cut off. And the stumps, they'd been badly sewn up. Crooked stitches. Infected. Bleeding. I felt my stomach churn. Mr. Harrison's voice grew hollow. If you haven't understood yet, let me explain. He looked at me directly, his expression empty. The man living in that apartment was a cannibal. A cold wind drifted through the courtyard. With food shortages everywhere, he started kidnapping children, eating them to survive. Mr. Harrison's voice dropped to a whisper. And he didn't like frozen meat. A wave of nausea washed through me. So he kept one child alive, eating pieces of her over time. The old man looked away, his face full of quiet horror. The girl died not long after we found her. For a few seconds, I couldn't even find my voice. The images his story painted still twisted in my mind. Finally, I swallowed and managed to ask, my voice shaking. But, how do you know all those details? Mr. Harrison slowly turned his head toward me. For the first time that evening, something almost like embarrassment flickered across his face. When more officers arrived, the whole building filled with people. Detectives, medics, reporters eventually. My father told me he was taking me straight home. He sighed quietly. But before we left, I took something from that apartment. He glanced around the empty courtyard as if someone might overhear. Even now, there was a notebook lying on the kitchen table. Old, dirty, filled with handwritten notes. I don't even know why I did it. Maybe curiosity. Maybe I wanted a souvenir of what felt like an adventure back then. His expression hardened with regret. I grabbed it while nobody was looking, slipped it under my jacket and carried it home. He rubbed his trembling hands together. And later, when I finally had time to look at it, he hesitated. I opened it. His voice dropped again. It was his diary. A cold wave crawled across my skin. He'd written everything down. Every method. How he watched children. How he chose them. Where he waited. How he lured them away. Mr. Harrison's jaw tightened. He even described how he cooked the meat. How long it lasted. How he stored it. A hollow pause followed. I wish I'd never read those pages. The buzzing street lamp flickered again above us. And the notebook. I still have it. He turned toward me fully now. You want to see it? I looked at him and shivered. His eyes were shining now, almost like a child desperate to share a secret. Something about the expression felt deeply unsettling. Too eager. Too excited. And to my own surprise, I really wanted to see that notebook. Every instinct told me to go home. But curiosity was louder. Well, he said, already starting to stand, groaning slightly as he pushed himself off the bench, come on then. I'll show you. Before I could answer, a voice suddenly cut through the courtyard. Emily, get inside. Now. I jumped. It was my mom, leaning out of our apartment window, clearly irritated after waiting for me to come home from school. Relief washed over me so suddenly that my knees almost felt weak. Sorry, Mr. Harrison, I said quickly. My mom's calling me. Can you show it to me tomorrow? I heard the impatience in my own voice, burning with curiosity and disappointment at missing the chance tonight. Tomorrow, okay? For a moment, something unreadable passed over his face. Then he slowly sat back down. Of course, Emily. Tomorrow, he said quietly. Stop by any time. I waved goodbye and hurried toward the building entrance, the heavy door slamming shut behind me. The next day, I could barely focus in school. All I could think about was Mr. Harrison's story and the notebook he promised to show me. My curiosity burned so intensely that every class felt endless. The clock hands seemed frozen in place. The moment the final bell rang, I practically ran home. As I turned onto our street and approached our apartment building, my pace slowed. Something was wrong. A crowd of people stood gathered near the entrance. Neighbors whispered nervously, some still in work clothes, others in house slippers as if they'd rushed outside without thinking. A police cruiser blocked part of the parking lot, its lights silently spinning red and blue across the grey walls of the building. And mixed into the crowd were people with cameras and microphones. Reporters. A cold unease crept into my stomach. Then I heard a familiar voice. Emily. I turned and saw my mom pushing through the crowd, waving me over urgently. Come here. I walked toward her, confusion growing with every step. What happened? I asked. My mom grabbed my arm, pulling me closer as if she didn't want anyone else to hear. Mr. Harrison died this morning, she said. But something in her voice wasn't right. She wasn't just sad. She was shaken. Before I could ask anything else, a woman in a bright coat holding a microphone stepped right beside us, speaking directly into a camera. And we are reporting live outside the apartment building where, earlier this morning, police discovered numerous human remains inside the home of a deceased resident. The crowd fell quieter, people straining to listen. The remains include multiple limbs and body parts, the reporter continued, her voice carefully controlled. According to preliminary forensic analysis, they belong to children between the ages of 5 and 12. A murmur rippled through the crowd. I felt my stomach twist painfully. The man, now being referred to online as the city cannibal, was found dead in his apartment earlier today. While authorities have not officially confirmed acts of cannibalism, investigators did discover what appears to be a personal diary detailing the suspect's activities over several years. The reporter shifted slightly, gesturing toward a police officer standing nearby. Captain Reynolds from the City Police Department is here with us now to provide further details. A uniformed officer stepped closer to the reporters, clearing his throat before speaking into the cluster of microphones. Earlier this morning, at approximately 9:30 a.m., the body of resident George Harrison, age 78, was discovered inside his apartment. Preliminary medical reports indicate death due to cardiac arrest. Cameras clicked. Neighbors whispered behind us. The officer continued, his voice steady but tense. When medical personnel arrived, they reported a strong odor coming from the basement storage area connected to the apartment. Upon inspection, officers discovered multiple severed human remains. A wave of shocked murmuring rolled through the crowd. Investigators also recovered a handwritten journal believed to belong to the deceased. The contents describe, in detail, how the suspect allegedly lured children into his apartment. I felt my breath grow shallow. The officer kept speaking. According to the entries, the suspect approached children in the building or nearby neighborhood, telling them a disturbing story about a cannibal he claimed to have encountered in his own childhood. After gaining their trust, he invited them upstairs to show them what he described as real documentation of those events. My stomach dropped. Once the child entered the apartment, the officer continued, the suspect attacked them. My ears started ringing. The rest of his words blurred together. I didn't want to hear more. I already knew enough. Slowly, I looked back at my mother. Her face was pale. Emily, she whispered, clearly still shaken. I was the one who found him. A chill crawled up my back. I went upstairs this morning to ask him for some salt, she continued quietly. Knocked on the door, but it was already open. She swallowed. So I stepped inside. And there he was. Lying on the floor. I felt my pulse pounding again. His dentures were on the carpet beside him, she said. Then her expression twisted with discomfort. And his mouth was wide open. I leaned closer to check if he was breathing. She hesitated, visibly disturbed by the memory. And his teeth, they looked wrong. My stomach clenched. They were sharp, she whispered. Like he'd filed them down himself.